everybody, and welcome to MEERTALK. My name is Kaisa Fern, and I'm the Director of Communications at MEER. We are so happy to be getting together for another MEERTALK. Today, we're going to hear from Vishwanath, and then we'll take questions from people in the MEER community. After that, we're going to open it up to all of you. Dr. Tao is still in China to establish new academic collaborations and explore potential research partnerships. In order to carry out the research crucial for MEER's further development, we do rely on donations. If you don't already donate and you would like to contribute to our efforts to cool the planet, we appreciate your donations. You can go to meer.org/donate. And thank you so much for those of you contributing. You can also write to info@meer.org to be in touch anytime. So now let me tell you about our guest speaker for today. Vishwanath is a civil engineer and urban planner with 38 years of experience in the sustainable water management sector. Currently, he is looking at projects which integrate local waters into the sustainable water space in both urban and rural areas in India. If anybody has a question that comes up while Vishwanath is presenting, please send those along to co-host Kathy in the chat. All right, Vishwanath, well, it's so wonderful that you could join us. I know it's a little late there where you are, so special appreciation for that. And we'd love to hear what you have to tell us about water resources. So take it away.
My pleasure. Thank you, and thank you for hosting me. I'd like to take you through in the next 22 minutes some of the practices and experience that I and my team from Biome Trust have had in working with local communities in trying to find sustainable water solutions in the area around my city called Bangalore, which is part of South India. I call it local water solutions in an era of global warming for the city of Bangalore in India. It's in South India. We're the capital of a state called Karnataka, which is in South India. A bit about the city. It is one of the third largest cities in India with a very high and very rapid growth of population. We are currently at around 14.5 million people. The situation with water is that it has to be pumped 95 kilometers and 300 meters up from a river which is close by. The energy required in getting this water up is really huge, and it makes it one of the costliest waters in this part of Asia. So because of the sheer energy that's required to get it up this high and this distance, and the total transfer is about 2,275 million liters per day. That will be the transfer by the end of this year. And as in many parts of the developing world, the river basin which Bangalore is called the Kaveri River. You see the river basin here, and this is a contested river between two states, essentially four states, four provinces as you would have it in some parts of the globe. And it's a closed basin in the sense that the waters of the river don't reach the sea most parts of the year. And most years, 7 out of 10 years, there will be no water available to reach the sea. So it's very contested waters, and it's a limit to what the allocation for the city of Bangalore itself is. And as you can see from this graph, we are up on the ridge line as far away from the river as is possible in terms of vertical distance, which makes it really difficult for city managers to get water to our city. So there is this huge transfer, and as I will go along, I'll explain the imagination of the city itself, where it is trying to turn itself from a net consumer of water to a producer of what you would call water and fertilizer. And I'll explain as I go along. Most cities are seen in the body politic of a river basin to be consuming resources and actually sending down pollution downstream, pollution in the form of wastewater and industrial wastewater too. But the city wants to try and see whether it can change the situation, with a bit of explanation to come in the future. A bit in the past, the city was struck by a severe drought in the year 1876 to 78, 3 years, consecutive failure of the monsoon, which meant there was famine, and about 90,000 people died in the city alone. And about 12.5 lakh people, or 1.5 million people, died in the state of Mysore, which was roughly 1/4 of the population. So this left a terrible scar. And what it proved was that the local waters, the local lakes and wells were simply not sufficient to harbor a population of 150,000 then. during severe climate change. And this was natural climate change, this was drought. So now when you're faced with urban climate change, urban warming, and global climate change, we need to learn from the past a bit. What the city did then in the past was to go to its nearest river, which is about 20 kilometers away, put up a large dam, use steam engines, and pump water to itself, and therefore brought reliability to itself. Because the river had a larger catchment and the storage in the reservoir was much, much more statistically reliable and available for the city as compared to the local water. So the progress of the city away from its local sources started as early as 1896. And it's now gone as far away as 95 kilometers and 300 meters away, as I was showing you in the first slides. But then there is a current re-interest in the local water agenda. One, because the faraway waters from the river is more or less over. There's a ceiling, there's a cap to it. We cannot draw more from that river. And two, we realize that the faraway waters are very energy intensive and therefore carbon intensive. And so can we therefore look at what we call the 6 taps in our city, which is rainwater, the dominant tap, surface water, the rainwater falling and getting stored in lakes and wetlands, groundwater, both in the form of shallow aquifers, this is hard rock terrain, and deep aquifers, which are in cracks and crevices, soil moisture, essentially for plants and trees and biodiversity in the city, used water, or what's called treated sewage water, used water, which comes from the non-consumptive use in the city, and piped water from the river 100 kilometers away. So these 6 taps are sought to be put to productive use, and we are part of it from the Biome Trust, both working with communities as well as with the state in trying to find solutions. One of the traditional way the water system was managed hereabouts in this part of India was through artificial lakes called tanks. What you see here is an artificial lake. It's an earthen dam thrown across a valley lined with stones, as you see in the figure on the left, or as on the figure on the right, the overflow weir, which holds back water during the monsoons and then makes it available during the non-monsoon period. The challenge with India with waters is that it rains for essentially 4 months in the year, June, July, August, September, and we have to keep it for the rest of the 8 months, stock it up in our soil moisture, groundwater, forests, glaciers, springs, etc., etc. So the way the ancients dealt with water management in this semi-arid part was to make these tanks. And this tank has a history of more than 1,000 years in terms of its construction. And so these waste weirs and overflow weirs were carefully constructed. One tank or one lake overflowed to the next, and you usually had a cascade of lakes or tanks before it entered into a river. And this state of ours had 36,000 tanks, and my city alone had 1,000 tanks. It was called the city of 1,000 lakes. Now we are down to about 185 in our city. And these tanks had beautiful command areas, areas which were irrigated by the waters, and generally what was grown was paddy. In the low-lying area of the valleys, paddy is being grown here for 1,000 years or more. Now, this tank system also recharged the groundwater, the shallow aquifer especially, because it was used for flood irrigation, and therefore, during the non-water months in the tank, groundwater would be used by the farmers or agriculturists to supplement their water requirement for cultivation. Now we are much part of this tank revival movement. Many other people are, many other groups are. We from Biome work with essentially women-led groups because we believe that it's essential to bring the landless as part of the solution. So water is not simply a functional good, it's also a social good and an ecological good. And when you see it as a social good, what you see is that when water comes to a lake or a tank like that before, the people who benefit the most are those who own land. If you have land, you use the waters for irrigation and agriculture and you grow more crops. But if you do not own land, if you don't have access to land, water really doesn't mean much to you. And therefore, how should water deliver social justice and equity is as much a challenge as water itself in the environment. And here, women lead the desilting of these kind of channels which bring water to the lake. I'll show you those figures, and all including the distribution of the water into the paddy fields, right? So women's groups get a daily wage labor. They earn for about 100 days in a year. And in another 100 days, they're able to work in the farmer's fields if there's enough water there, because 2 to 3 crops are then grown in the farmer's field. So 200 days of work through this kind of participation, plus another 100 days of work by the government, which is called the Employment Guarantee Scheme, makes sure that women can get about 300 days of wage labor in a year, therefore getting the monies to be invested in family education, health, etc., of their choice. So for us, water revival, local water revival is as much a social process, a gendered social process, as it is a physical process or an ecological process. And for us, one of the successes is, of course, when the songs of the paddy come back, as for example, this. So the intangibles are also as important as the tangibles of the water coming in and the process of getting the water back. So this song, for example, in this particular lake came back after 14 years because the tank was otherwise derelict. So some measures of success are this. So that's at a sort of a rural regional scale, which is just abutting our city of Bangalore, and which is also part of peri-urban Bangalore. We're working with 21 lakes now in one particular geography to revive it. Let's get to the first step here within the city itself, which is rainwater harvesting. Now, rainwater harvesting is making a nice entry into our city since 2009, and people harvest rain from rooftops using rain barrels, as you can see now. So this is being designed in such a fashion that it's now the law. Every new building has to have its own rainwater harvesting system, and for every square meter of roof area, you have to create a 60-liter storage or recharge. And for every square meter of paved area around the buildings that you build, you must create 30 liters per square meter of storage or recharge. In the Indian context, rainwater harvesting is seen both as storage, but also as managed aquifer recharge in other parts of the world, where you top up the water into the shallow aquifer by pushing it through recharge wells or leaky wells, the things that you see at the bottom. And we are facilitated on this because the rainfall distribution in our city, the rainy days are 59.8, 60 rainy days, 970 millimeters of rainfall annually, spread virtually over 8 months, which makes rainwater harvesting a very nice initiative because you don't have to design large storage structures. And so this is what a typical rainwater system looks like. There are about 200,000 buildings and institutions which are implementing rainwater harvesting in our city, 200,000, which is not a small number. You pick rooftop rainwater in the pipes. The blue drum is a filter. You store it in an underground sump tank. The overflow from the sump tank goes to the recharge well. A typical recharge well is about 0.9 meters in diameter and about 6 to 8 meters in depth. So therefore, the water goes into the shallow aquifer. And if there is excess water, it goes to the storm drain and then runs off. This is the typical design that's being implemented across the city. You can see this here, Mr. Balsubramaniam, a senior gentleman, picking rooftop rainwater. The blue drum is a charcoal filter. The blue tarpaulin sheet covers a well, which is about 40 feet deep. He puts about 200,000 liters of rainwater into this shallow aquifer into his well, and he draws all his water requirement from the well. So many such smaller aquifers have been facilitative enough in accommodating the rainwater, but also providing it for the households. Mind you that a well will give you the cheapest water in town because it costs you only about 0.1 units of energy for 1,000 liters of water, simply because it has to be pumped through a very small head. And therefore, stormwaters are also being redesigned, where you then hold on to the water in the storm drains and you allow it to infiltrate into the soil to make up soil moisture, as in the left, or to go into the leaky well, as on the right, which goes into the shallow aquifer. And when you get gated communities, about 360 plots to 500 plots, what these communities do is to make sure that every plot recharges the rainwater or stores it, and that the waters drawn from the groundwater are communitized, in the sense there's no private drawing of water, but 3 or 4 boreholes which are sunk in, and the waters drawn from the aquifer shared by all the houses. And the sharing also happens by metering it and pricing it, sending in price signals so that you don't consume more than, let's say, 20,000 liters a month, based on the ecological availability of the water. The money so collected from this kind of water charge and water harvesting is then invested in wastewater treatment plants by the gated community here, and the treated wastewater is then made available to every household for non-potable use, for example, for gardening, for toilet flushing, or for car washing. And therefore, the cycle is completed. The dependency is only on rainwater and groundwater. The net freshwater demand is reduced by using treated wastewater, and therefore the systems become stable and water positive if they do it at scale. And this is what we think the city should follow. This is happening at large gated community level. So I'm just sort of describing the whole process. The processes of treating water as a common pool resource, rather than as a private resource or as a state resource. And that's very important. You treat it as a common pool resource. That's why you manage it as a community. And you need that scale for it to be done well. We are also in the process of reviving old dug wells with the help of the well digging community. Beautiful structures like this, which are more than 100 to 150-year old, which became dysfunctional over time because people shifted to pipe water. But we think that by reviving it with the help of the community, we're able to make sure that water is available for women. And women have had a major role in how the well water has to be used. In some cases, they demand that no motor or pump should be put, that they will draw water from the well using buckets, because they realize that if you put a pump, there's likely no control on demand. You will overuse the water and the wells will go dry. And by hand drawing it and taking just as much as they need it, let's say 2 to 3 pots as the one you can see on the right, they make sure that the life of the well is extended and they have water security. Because one of the things that they demand, or which they think is most important to them, is when they come back home from work, they should be assured that there is some amount of water available for them, for having a bath, for washing their clothes, for doing the dishes, for whatever purpose they so choose to. And this sort of mental stress, which is relieved by the knowledge that good, clean water is available in the well, just 4 pots of them, 4 pots or 5 pots, has been found to be very beneficial for them. That's the way they articulated it. And we've gone ahead and with their help and with the help of other funders, we've been able to revive many, many such wells now. And we've been lucky here because the well digging itself and the well cleaning is a traditional livelihood skill. This community called the Manuvadar has been practicing the skill of digging wells for 1,000 years and more. They're a migrant community which moves from place to place and would dig wells. Now they're settled, but they don't have a livelihood today because a lot of boreholes are being drilled using rigs, whereas the wells have lost importance. But now they dig something called recharge wells. As you see in the figure in the center, right, recharge wells are small precast concrete rings which go about 6 to 8 meters deep, which are about 1 meter in diameter, 0.9 to 1 meter in diameter, which pick rooftop rainwater and storm water and push it into the aquifer. Unlike the wells which provide water, you push water into the aquifer, and that's recharge wells. This community now has a very good livelihood. They've designed close to 250,000, designed and built 250,000 or more recharge wells. And the goal is that the community will build 1 million such recharge wells for the city of Bangalore. And therefore, we believe that water security for the city will come through the livelihoods of these well diggers. So traditional skills, livelihoods, resulting in water security, not just large infrastructure, is one imagination that we have to work on. So 750 to 1,000 well digger families and individuals and teams now have jobs on a sustained basis where they're doing the recharge wells to push water into the aquifer. And they're cleaning up old, beautiful structures, heritage structures, like the one on the left that you see, which is dysfunctional, more than 150 years old, now clean and put back to place, not merely as a heritage, but also as a functional device. The well on the right will give you about 1.1 million liters of water in a continuous pumping of 3 to 4 days, because the aquifer is so accommodative. So reviving heritage, providing livelihoods, getting back to functionality is the way that we work on. These wells, for example, which had a lot of silt accumulated over decades, are now getting cleaned, disinfected with potassium permanganate, bleaching powder, make sure that the water is potable, then allow the community to use it the way they want to use it, right? And so even richer communities are now protecting these old wells and these old structures and making sure that they integrate it as part of landscape architecture, but also as functional requirement for their water requirement. So the rich and the poor together have to be part of the solution in the city, which is what we hope for. This 3-tap well in this day of crisis, which hit us for about 180 days at the beginning of this year, continue to provide water on a daily basis for people up to 1.5 kilometers away who would come and pick up water. And this well was functional because the well diggers went in and cleaned it up and removed all the muck and disinfected it. I'll just come to the next level of water management, which is lakes. The city of 1,000 lakes now has about 185 lakes only remaining. And these lakes now are recipients of untreated wastewater and garbage. How do you clean it up is one question. And I'll pick one lake, which you see on the right center, called Jakkur Lake, which is 50 hectares in water spread and about 18.9 square kilometers in catchment area. That's the lake, Jakkur Lake, as I call it. And I'll focus attention on the wastewater treatment plant. What you see on the top with the 2 circles just below the brown patch, it's a 15 million liters per day wastewater treatment plant, which treats wastewater to very high qualities. The treated wastewater comes to This is the wastewater treatment plant, which you see, which is upstream of the lake, picks up all the sewage that comes into that area. The sludge itself has been tested for heavy metals and is being used as a soil conditioner because it's rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and is great as a soil amendment for soil. That's being used. The treated wastewater, as you see on the right, is of a very high quality. Actually, it meets potable standards. There's only the yuck factor which prevents us from drinking it. So to overcome the yuck factor, you push the treated wastewater into a constructed wetland. The water is going in the channel, as you can see from the left. It's going into this constructed wetland. The constructed wetland is a really rich biodiverse space with small birds, mammals, reptiles, as including the weaver bird, polishes the water. And from the constructed wetland, the water moves in, as you can see here, very clear water into the water body, which is the lake. The lake is always full throughout the year, during the rainy season with rainwater, and during the summer season with treated wastewater. And the lake itself provides livelihoods. Again, I go back to the theme of livelihoods. The livelihoods is for a fisherman's cooperative who are able to harvest this fish. And the fish in turn is protein for the city and nutrition for the city, livelihoods for the fishermen. And the fishermen take responsibility for keeping the lake clean from plastics and floating garbage. And then the birds return, the biodiversity returns. Painted storks and pelicans now are no longer migrants, they're permanent residents in this city, and we joke that they're going to vote in the local elections also. It's possible to revive the environment at the same time as providing livelihoods by using treated wastewater. And in turn, the lake recharges the aquifer and the wells are full. This well water now with a little amount of treatment can be going back to the water cycle for domestic consumption. So that's the advantage of reviving lakes using treated wastewater in the city. And therefore, the last point that I wanted to make, which is the city itself as a water and fertilizer factory. How does that happen? The city has 34 wastewater treatment plants, large wastewater treatment plants, which gets wastewater. The 34 ones are distributed all across the city. Treated wastewater is treated to adequate standards and now pumped in about 100 to 120 kilometers to fill 200 lakes in the drought-prone, climate change-affected districts of Kolar and Chikballapur, abutting the city of Bangalore, up to 120 kilometers away, where farmers can make a good living because the soil is excellent, but only for want of water. They cannot get a crop out. 7 out of 10 years are drought years there. So therefore, now treated wastewater from Bangalore is currently filling 200 lakes, will eventually fill between 500 to 700 lakes up to 180 kilometers, making sure that water is available for farmers, providing water security to farmers. They get livelihood security, and the environment itself is sort of made beautiful, and the micro environment changed, as you can see in these lakes. And the lakes, as I showed you in Jakkur, has fishing. So therefore, there's fishing activities and fish providing more income to fisher folks. And it recharges the aquifer and you get food security for the city. What's called the circular economy, where wastewater transforms itself to food and comes back to the city, giving food security and nutrition security in this era of climate change. So this is a project which the Minor Irrigation Department of the Government of Karnataka and the Bangalore Water Supply and Sewerage Board is working on. And we from Biome Trust have also been helping them to understand farmers' needs and requirements and quality of treatment to make sure that the project goes well and better. So the city now has the second largest transfer of treated wastewater for agriculture project in the world, next only to Mexico City. Currently, 810 million liters per day is being sent out. Eventually, about 2,000 million liters per day of treated wastewater will go from the city to fill the lakes that I was mentioning and describing to you. And the treated wastewater not only builds aquifers and provides water for agriculture, but it does something remarkable now. Here's the town of Devanhalli, very close to Bangalore, where the international airport is located. The town has 45,000 people, 110 bore wells, which have gone really deep and which has extremely saline water. So people have to use reverse osmosis system for their drinking water requirements. Otherwise, they have extremely saline water. So what do you do with local waters? The fort, which you see on the left bottom in pink, is from 1501. And the lake, which is called Sihinir in blue, is also from 1501. But the lake was bone dry. As you can see, the farmer is washing his feet, and behind him is the lake absolutely bone dry. So this lake was cleaned up with the help of an NGO and the community, completely the silt removed and the catchment connected to the lake. And this is how the lake looks like now. The lake has rainwater and treated wastewater. Diluted treated wastewater is permanently full. Next to the lake was a beautiful old dug well full of garbage. On the left, the well diggers are cleaning it up. And on the right, you see the water now, right? It's the filtered water from the lake, which comes in through the shallow aquifer and comes into the well. And this is how the well looks like. The well has fish and turtles inside it swimming. It's absolutely clean water, good enough for water treatment plants to treat it and further and supply it for drinking. This single well gives you 250,000 liters of water in a 12-hour pumping cycle and recuperates in the next 12 hours. And a simple treatment unit using a micron filter, activated carbon filter, UV filtration, and chlorination, making sure it's compliant with India's drinking water standards, makes sure that the water requirement of Devnali town is now increasingly met by this lake. We've got phase two, we've got it to up to 700,000 liters a day now, as of yesterday, and we hope to take it to 5 billion liters per day. And the beautiful part of this reuse of treated wastewater is not only is it climate adapting in the sense that treated wastewater is climate resilient water to a large extent, but also when you fill the aquifers and the groundwater table comes up, we find that the energy required per kiloliter of pumping drops dramatically to 0.25 units. So therefore, the carbon emissions from this water is also low as compared to deep borewell waters or water from the river Kaveri. Therefore, you get cheap water, less carbon water, and with cheap water, you're able to give the water to more and more of the populace because it just costs about 1 rupee 23 paisa for 1,000 liters of water, which is really cheap water. So these are some of the discoveries that we are making with the use of local waters and local resources and regeneration, because as you are and we are in this great journey of water literacy and eco-literacy. And the more we spread the message, the more we share information, the more science we throw into it, the better off we are as a society, provided we put our emphasis on the social aspect of water and the environmental aspect of water as much as the physical aspect of water. Thank you for your time and patience in hearing, and I'm happy to take questions.
Well, it's amazingly good news about how communities can work together for the good. And that's exactly what's needed in these times of climate, the climate crisis. We'd like to bring on somebody from the MEER community to ask a question. And so I will introduce Micah Denton. Micah Denton brings a background as a licensed professional civil engineer specialized in land development, hydrology, and hydraulics, with work experience in both the private and public sectors. A longtime advocate for safe alternative transportation options, including walking, biking, and transit, he recognizes and supports MEER's mission to provide urgently needed cooling relief through albedo enhancement. Thanks for being with us, Micah. You can go ahead.
All right. Hi, Vishwanath. Thank you so much for that. That was a tremendously enjoyable and interesting talk. A lot of those aspects, particularly around the rainwater harvesting bylaws, the massive distribution of small scale or local, each individual building infiltrating the rainwater and stormwater down into those dry wells. That's fantastic. And one of the challenges that that we encounter a lot in places that I've dealt with here in the U.S. is getting public interest and awareness and buy-in. That feeling of ownership over your local waters, and I think that's probably a fantastic way to encourage that community ownership sense of stewarding, taking care of the water resources. And you mentioned the yuck factor of the recycled treated sewage water, and that's something that we have I worked for a water treatment utility in the DC area, and south of DC there's a sewage treatment authority that is doing that, and they don't advertise it. It's this wonderful project, but they don't promote it. They don't, so there's no like public, support, or like, look at this wonderful thing we've achieved. It's like, no, let's just not mention it so that no one has that yuck factor. but it directly, or it feeds into a reservoir, and then that feeds directly into right next door is a water treatment plant. But anyways, I guess as like trying to work towards a question here for something maybe you could comment further on is would you say that those efforts like the bylaws helping to build that sense of community ownership, is that something that really helps these projects succeed, as opposed to so many projects where like ones that I've dealt with in the DC area and elsewhere, where it's purely just a capital project that no one in the public is aware of or has any sense of buy-in to, and so you really have to kind of force these things. Do you find more public support and appreciation of these projects, and do you think that is helped by programs like those? I think you said the number 200,000 buildings helping with the rainwater harvesting. Do you think that really helps these projects to succeed?
It's a tough ask. So what the bylaws does is it sends a signal to the people that the government is serious, and there are many people who want to follow the law and therefore are compliant with the law and therefore will do rainwater harvesting. There's always the 5 to 10% people who'll do it because they love the environment and they love the new idea and they'll do it, right? These become the biggest ambassadors for us. So what we want to do is to put the spotlight on them, get the local TV, the local newspapers, the local social media to write about these people who are doing these cool things, right? And make it cool. That's a much better way of pushing the message than the bylaws themselves. The bylaws, well, you're reluctant. Why is the government asking me to do this? That's the kind of reaction you get. The ultimate mover is shortage and scarcity. When you're confronted with a drought, when you don't have water in your house, and you have to pay a lot of money to a tanker or a truck to deliver the water, at that point of time, you're persuaded. And if the message then comes across gently to you that you can do something about it yourself and perhaps solve the problem yourself if you want to, it gets you a good buy-in. But it's a patience testing process. You've got to be at it for about 15 years or 20 years before you get any kind of reasonable buy-in by which you're happy.
I don't have a lot of other questions. Like I said, this was a tremendously enjoyable talk. It's encouraging. Sounds like a great success story there. Managing I took note of the way you explained the 6 different sources to avoid having to lean exclusively on just piping in from long distance, because that's something that we see in a lot of our desert Southwest cities, Phoenix and Vegas, where the only bright ideas that people really want to latch onto are pipe it in from somewhere hundreds or even more miles away. So managing all of those 6 dimensions of integrating those together is a very encouraging approach to see laid out like that clearly.
Sure, Micah. As you know, as a civil engineer, we need to build the institutions which are able to see the 6 tabs, right? Currently, we just have our institutions built to see 1 tap, and that's pipe water supply, because we have only civil engineers. I'm a civil engineer myself. But what you need, for example, is hydrogeologists who will understand groundwater better, hydrologists and ecologists who will understand wetlands and surface water better, wastewater specialists who will understand treated reused water better. So we need to build well-rounded institutions if we are able to throw in all the solutions of the 6 tabs. And that is a patience process also.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much, Micah, for coming on. And we are now going to open it up to all of you. So if anybody has a question, you can write, or a comment, you can write that to Kathy in the chat, the co-host. And just to get things started, I wondered myself how you got into this field. Did you have an interest in water in particular, water resources as a youngster, or, as a child, or what brought you into this kind of research?
Yes, serendipity.
What was it?
Serendipity, luck, just by
Serendipity.
chance. I'm a drifter. I drift, and then this was one of the ideas that was so nice, and I just latched onto it. But and because you asked me, there's a beautiful magazine which comes out of from California called the Whole Earth Catalog. I got my hands on the Whole Earth magazine some donkey's years back, and that sort of was really something of an exposure to what different ideas were, and that was a small trigger too.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do have a couple of questions from Cam. So first of all, just a point of clarification, the source of the river is from the mountains, Cam is asking, or just from 4 months of rain?
It's still 4 months of rain falling on the mountains and the water then coming in as springs from there, right? It's not snow-fed or glacier-fed, it's rain-fed, and the rains in the mountains are also for 4 months.
And do people have to dig wells deeper this year in particular?
The boreholes in Bangalore have gone to a depth of 2,000 feet. They're the deepest boreholes or borewells in India, and it takes enormous energy to get the water out from those depths, and they're generally saline. Yes, people have had to dig really deep to get water, but the shallow aquifer behaves differently from the deep aquifers in many pockets, in many places. And the shallow aquifer, you haven't actually have had to dig too deep. You only dig about 30 feet deep there.
I see. Okay. Well, and Cam says you're doing such a wonderful job. How is the rest of India doing in this?
Oh, we're doing, so I'm just a small cog in the wheel. For us, there's a large network of people who are doing some amazing work in different cities, Hyderabad, Pune, Kolkata, Delhi. There are a million mutinies and a million solutions on board right now. And we're also loosely confederated. We exchange information with our networks. And beyond our network too, there are many people who are approaching this solution. We are lucky that we are doing it in a metropolis. Most of the other work is in smaller cities and in villages and in rural areas.
Let me see. Okay, well, we have a couple of questions coming in about water evaporation. So Jonathan is wondering what efforts have been taken in the region to reduce loss of, water, and have any underground chambers been built? Is there anything to block the sunshine from heating the open waters?
Absolutely. The total rainfall is between 700 to 900 millimeters in a year, and the evaporation losses are 1.5 meters to 1.8 meters. So evaporation is the killer for us. Therefore, we think that if we pick the water and push it into the shallow aquifer and the deeper aquifers, if you therefore don't lose water to evaporation. So the underground storage that is being talked about for us is the aquifer itself.
I see. Yeah, because as Peter points out, MEER is looking at engineering potential reflective covers, that can stretch across some of these large open wells. And that might be something interesting for us
Absolutely.
to talk about.
One of the advantages for rainwater harvesting, because you pointed out, was good reflective insulating paints on the terraces not only reflect the heat and take out, cool the house inside, but also increase runoff and make the runoff of the rainwater much, much clearer and easier to harvest. So there's a double benefit if you get on reflective surfaces and rainwater harvesting working in tandem.
Well, I have a question also from Jonathan okay, in your online interviews, you talk about the Jevons paradox. Maybe you can just review what that is for us. But in any case, the question was about, have you observed any policies that can blunt the effect or change the effect of Jevons paradox? So maybe you could talk a little bit about what that is, about having to do with the efficiency of the resource use and so forth.
Right. So Jevons paradox is this classic case that if you build a fuel efficient car, it doesn't mean that your fuel consumption will go down. It just means that there'll be more fuel efficient cars, and therefore the net fuel consumption may likely go up, right? So efficiency is not just the model for effectiveness, and that's a big challenge. For us in the water sector, the biggest challenge is that we are not able to price water at its scarcity value. It's politically unpalatable for any party, because we're a democracy, to be able to charge the true price for water. And unless we get to a situation where we capture both the human right to water, where everybody has access to water, good, clean water, but we are able to capture the price so that people don't waste it, so that it can be conserved and it can be recycled, we will be confronted with Jevons paradox. And that is a very tough nut to crack, the pricing of water.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We have a question from Gregory about, because there's the geography of where all these rivers originate. Do the rivers in India originate in the Himalayas, as Gregory is wondering? And are the aquifers stable or running dry throughout India? What is the situation with the aquifers and their
The
stability?
northern rivers, the Ganges and the Yamuna, are glacier fed, and they receive snow melt and spring water from the Himalayas. But the southern rivers start from the Western Ghats or the Western Mountain Range, which are rain fed. But they are tropical forests. They are a huge biodiversity hotspot, and they're absolutely rich in biodiversity. So these rivers start as springs from the Western Ghats or the Western Forest Range, right? That's what it is. The aquifer question, I just sort of, it skipped my mind. There was a question on the aquifer?
The question had to do with whether they're stable or running dry. What is the...
India is the world's largest user of groundwater. We use more groundwater than the USA and China combined, number 2 and number 3. And we have something like 40 million bore wells. And in about 40% of our aquifer zones, they are collapsing dramatically and very fast. About 60% of them are stable, but we have a huge challenge in managing the levels of groundwater. And therefore, for us, the importance of recharge.
Right. Bruce is asking, what level of effort is put into monitoring the rainfall, surface water, and groundwater levels to enable the program to adapt to changing climate conditions?
So we got really lucky in Bangalore. We've got a very decentralized network of weather stations, automatic weather stations, which gives us very granular data, something at 1 square kilometer each for the last 10 to 12 years. So we got very good data on rainfall and rainfall patterns. We understand that rainfall intensities have tripled. We were designing for 60 millimeters per hour. Now we have to design for 180 millimeters per hour. We used to get rainfall spread over 8 months. Now they're all bunched and they come in one group. So we know that. We know that the city is crusting too much, and therefore the runoff coefficient, which used to be 0.15, is closer to 0.90. So we know surface hydrology is being affected and impacted. We luckily, because of the million wells that we are digging, and because of the experience we have from all the wells we've desilted, the well diggers have desilted and brought to play, we get data from all the wells together for us, for ourselves. So we know how they are behaving hydrogeologically, and therefore we are trying to work towards making a model which will tell us what could happen in the event of rainfall failures or droughts and famines. But that's happening slowly. It's not happening at the pace that we would like to, because we're concentrating on the implementation on the ground.
I see. Okay. Well, we have another question that has to do with the social dynamics around water. You mentioned that water resources are especially important for the women in the community. And can you elaborate on why this is and what kinds of social dynamics might be, be impacting this?
So water, as many things, is gendered. If I show you the paddy fields, it's women who do the hard work of the paddy field and cultivation. So though I may romanticize it with the song, the work itself is backbreaking. Now, women generally don't own land in their name, and water benefits people who own land, right? So it's only now that women and men are jointly getting titles to land. Then there is the caste class discrimination that occurs. There is that factor which is to be dealt with in India. And so therefore, if they become part of the solution right from the beginning of the planning process, when you design solutions with them, dialoguing with them, and I'll just give you one example. a lot of places, the channels which feed the lakes are encroached by rich farmers. They will not give up that land, but without that land, without the channel, the lake will not get water. You could negotiate it through law. You could file a case. It will take 20 years for the case to be sorted out. Or you can have the women go to the encroacher, to this rich farmer, and say, look, we just need 1 meter of this channel. And if you give us that 1 meter for about half a kilometer, the lake will be full. We will benefit, you will benefit. Will you please give us that land? And usually the negotiation from a place of no power has the ability to transform than court cases and procedures. So therefore, we need, as a process of water management, to be empowering of those who are the most disempowered. And women are at the heart of that solution-making space. It's a long way ahead. Don't claim any victories. We fail more often than we succeed, but the journey has to be undertaken. It cannot be otherwise.
Yeah, such a true statement. Well, I wondered, I know it's late there. It's past midnight by now. And so I think we'll wrap up soon. But I just wondered if along the way, because it's really amazing. And the photos that you've shared are just really inspiring. I wondered, are there what has been the most, or one of the discouraging things that you've found along the way here in these kinds of projects? Like what is a challenge that is really difficult, and then also what is something that amazes you, in how well things go?
Let me start with the later part of the question. It's the easier one to answer. It's always amazing when you get a phone call from a household which says, hey, my rainwater tank is overflowing. Or somebody calls up and saying, we got this beautiful rain and our tank is full, and we now have started paddy cultivation in each one of our fields, right? And so, or the well diggers on a daily basis are sending me WhatsApp videos of wells that they're digging, how deep it's gone, how clean it's become, and all that. And they want to share success or failures. So that's one of the most heartening things, because you're engaged with the solution at every time. I don't see anything negative, because when I was young, I would rather be disappointed if I faced an impediment. But now what you learn is you have to use your communication skills and be able to persuade others to look at the problem from your eyesight, right? From the view of the community. And so therefore, there's nothing that is a dampener. The only thing that can be said to be a bit dampening is the academic world does not seem to get interested in solutions as much as in problem finding. And sometimes I do wish that academics would not be so uptight about the polemics of it all, but be part of the process of finding solutions, however suboptimal they are. So, but that's the least of my disappointments. I'm not really disappointed with that too.
Right. Well, here's one last question, maybe from somebody who's interested in history. When you search for these old wells that you talked about reactivating, do you study ancient documents and maps? How do you, how do you go about that?
So the well diggers have are living history. No, their great grandfathers have dug wells. They go to a particular area, and through oral history, they know where the wells are. And it's an incredibly rich knowledge, which modern science has somehow not really worked on. If at best it can be documented as oral history or folk tales, right? But not from a hydrogeological perspective. So for us, now we can sniff a well from about 5 kilometers, an old well. And one of the most remarkable sniffing was done in Indonesia, where in a temple where I could identify 2 wells, which the locals themselves had not seen for 50 years. So there's a particular location, there's a particular characteristic in which the wells are. Most of it comes from oral history. It doesn't come from documented history, because wells have not been documented.
Well, that's interesting. Well, I don't know if you have any unexpected discoveries that you've made along the way, that give you hope for the future, but maybe that's how we could end, if you have anything
I'm
to share.
completely hopeful about the future. I think it's just a question of vision and imagination that's limiting us. Once we get our imagination goal ready, then we just need to work on it. For sure, the Titanic has hit the iceberg, but let's have fun enjoying the orchestra and painting the deck chairs in the colors which we like. It's still, there's no other reason but to be optimistic, is what I think about it.
That's really good to hear. Well, we want to thank you so much, Vishwanath, for coming to MEERTALK today and furthering our education about sustainability, climate change, and all. Thank you.
My pleasure. And Jonathan had put up the Whole Earth catalog for some time. Lovely to see the whole figure of the Whole Earth catalog. Thanks a lot, John. There it go. Beautiful.
All right. Thank you. At MEER, we are working to help educate the public while also developing a solution to the warming on the planet. We invite you to keep learning about Earth's energy imbalance and climate science on our website. We're mostly volunteer staff, so please do consider making a monthly donation of any amount if you have enjoyed watching. And you can check out our social media. If you found being here beneficial, informative, educational, please do tell somebody else about MEERTALK. We hope to see you again next month on Sunday, October 6th, when atmospheric scientist Jennifer Francis will be our guest speaker. So until then, take care, everybody, and thanks again for watching.